Hey, everybody, welcome to the second episode of the Hot Pursuit Retargeting Podcast. Today, we are joined by Steve Dinelli. Steve, tell us a little bit about your background and what we're going to talk about today.
Yeah, so appreciate you having me on. My background has been in marketing for, I guess it's maybe 8 or 9 years, 10 years now. It's hard to keep track. But in early 2015, I fell into starting a direct to consumer e commerce agency, specifically focused around paid media, Facebook ads, Google ads. At one point, we were the highest spending advertiser on Pinterest, which was kind of cool. And that company was called Blackbird Garage. And I ran that from 2015 to 2020. We worked with a lot of the best direct to consumer brands from HelloFresh to Movement Watches, Casper Mattresses, Brooklinen, a lot of these kind of household D2C names. And in August of 2020, the company got acquired by a group out of Connecticut called Barrington Media Group, which is a offline TV, radio, and print agency. We were their first digital acquisition. I was there for almost 2 years. We bought a few other digital agencies, and that's my story. I've spent a lot of money on paid media, have spent a lot of money on retargeting, and I think that leads into what we're going to talk about today is how direct-to-consumer brands can use retargeting most effectively.
Yeah, and I think what's really interesting to me about it is just that D2C e-commerce is is pretty unique. And there are a lot of insights that I think apply to marketing just in general, and some things that maybe people in the B2B space or more traditional e-commerce have maybe not thought about. So I'm really looking forward to get some to pumping you for information.
Great. Let's kick it off.
Yeah. So why would you say retargeting is such a critical component of marketing, especially when it comes to direct to consumer e-commerce?
Yeah, so in D2C, a lot of these are new brands. The brands that I worked with were very small when we first started working with them. So there wasn't a lot of brand awareness. People didn't know much about them. And if they discovered the brand, whether it might have been through a prospecting ad, it might have been through word of mouth, it might have been, you know, who knows how, they need to stay relevant. That brand needs to stay top of mind for the user because there aren't these big national brand campaigns going on. It's a lot of lower budget marketing, trying to be cost effective, trying to get profitable on orders. And retargeting allowed a lot of these brands to look very big when they were actually very small and early stage, where you're a consumer and you discover a brand you've never heard of, but you start seeing ads for them all over. It's like, okay, these guys are pretty trustworthy. So it was a really big deal, especially early on, for a lot of the brands that I mentioned and have worked with.
And what would you say? What would you say is the? I mean, I guess there's probably multiple factors that you have to keep in mind to achieve that. Like for example, I mean, so if one of the big benefits is that credibility, that feeling that you're kind of omnipresent, I'm assuming you have to be somewhat careful as far as like audience segmentation and things like that. Are there any things that stand out to you as just fundamentals that people need to just right off the bat be thinking about when it comes to retargeting?
Yeah, that's a big question. So I'll try and break it apart. As far as like big picture, you just have to do it. And I think it should be, if you're an early stage company or a later stage company, it should be your first paid media dollars because they're going to be the most effective. Somebody's already heard about you. It's a lot more effective to close the deal or sell them than it is to cold prospect somebody new. So retargeting is critical in that aspect. As far as like segmentation goes, to get into that part of the question, you can do a lot of really cool things. Somebody who maybe has added to cart and gotten very close to purchasing should be served one ad, but someone who maybe only viewed a product page or maybe only viewed the About Us page, they should be served a different ad, because as they're moving through that sales funnel and getting warmer and closer to actually purchasing, they need to get different messages and communication to actually push them over the edge to be a converting customer.
And what about channels? Do you have any guidance for people when it comes to choosing the right channels, or how many channels that they should be focusing on? Anything in that area?
Yeah, so I think you should definitely at least start on whatever channels you're prospecting on, whether that's paid or organic. So if you're doing a lot of, say, Facebook or Instagram ads or organic posting, you should probably be retargeting on those channels because your customer is there. You know they're there. Um, GDN or any of the display networks are also usually pretty effective just because they're so inexpensive. You need to remember your retargeting audience is going to be relatively small. No matter what scale you're at, it's going to be, smaller than your prospecting audiences. So you can spend a smaller amount of money on retargeting, but still get really big results. I'd also say if you have any press about your business, Taboola and Outbrain and some of the other native content networks, uh, they might not be great out of the gate for prospecting, but it can be really effective retargeting where, somebody's browsing a popular site like MSN or I think like Forbes or all those, and they scroll down and they see the sponsored content at the bottom and your brand is featured. The consumer doesn't always differentiate that that's not part of the major publication. So it's another way to create a lot of trust and credibility with a relatively small budget.
They get me with those all the time. I'll see them. I'm like, oh, this is really interesting. I click over, and then I guess I'm probably on their retargeting list, even if I wasn't before. Is there? I think that the native idea is really. I think that seems like an area where people. I don't feel like people really think about that as much. It was for a while that was something that was kind of a big a big thing, and now people seem to have sort of forgotten about it, maybe because they were struggling to drive that bottom of funnel traffic and the conversions. What would you say are the keys to having a successful native advertising campaign, with the understanding being that first of all probably you're not going to really have conversions as being the immediate objective?
Yeah, that's a great question. So native is a bit different. The ads and the ad placements are unique compared to what a lot of people are running on Facebook or Instagram or somewhere where you have like a center full screen experience. These ads need to be typically a little clickbaitier. Typically, those headlines are a little more aggressive. They're not as branded because you're catching somebody who's reading another piece of content and then saying, like, hey, you should stop reading that piece of content and come over and read ours. So you got to be really interesting and unique in your ad copy, which is great. And then also the images are typically smaller and a slightly different format. So like a lot of retargeting services will just feed in your product photos, your still shot on a white background. And if you have that in the product name on a native network, you're never going to get a click. You need to think of it completely different and really test and optimize it separately. What's nice is a lot of the native networks have best practices and they'll share PDFs or they'll share top performing ads from other brands. So if you kind of model off of that, it's pretty easy to get it going quickly.
And what would you say more broadly, just now that we're kind of on the topic of best practices, what what would you recommend when it comes to creating retargeting creatives and copy? What do you think is most important to think about there?
Yeah, so I think that goes back to your earlier question about segmentation. So if somebody is, let's say, added to cart but not completed their purchase yet, they have some level of apprehension towards purchasing. So there might be an objection that they have that you haven't been able to overcome either on the product page or the rest of the site. So normally with prospecting ads, I say like, don't sell the features, just sell the vision, the what it's going to achieve for you, what the product's going to do for you. But in retargeting, I might want to have 5 different features on 5 different ads. So say you're selling, I don't know, a mattress, which is like a big D2C thing. Uh, the prospecting ad just might be, hey, you're going to sleep better on this mattress. Here's why. And then user clicks through, goes to the site. Well, in retargeting, you might want to have something very specific, one ad about the technology, one about how it's shipped to the customer, one about how it's, maybe has a celebrity endorsement. You want to have a few different retargeting ads that the platforms can rotate through that overcome each of the different objections that a customer might have. That's one strategy. And then, maybe if it's somebody who hasn't gone that deep into the funnel and you have them segmented differently, maybe they're higher in the funnel, maybe them you offer a discount code to. A lot of people think retargeting is immediately like, give them a discount code. I don't think that's necessarily the case, because if somebody's very close to purchase, you could probably get them to convert at full price. Um, but if they're higher in the funnel, maybe viewed about us or a category page, a discount could bring them back.
And I would guess that the answer to this is probably it depends. It seems like in marketing that's so often the answer. But when it comes to how granular you can get in your segmentation, have you noticed any sort of rule of thumb for how small an audience can be before it just doesn't make sense to be that granular?
Yeah, that's a really good question, because it's something that a lot of people ask and struggle with. Conceptually, you think like, hey, I want to segment this as small as possible and get very targeted with my messaging. But when you do that, you lose media efficiency, because typically the smaller the audience it's going to be, the more expensive it's going to be to reach them. It also becomes a lot of ad management debt that you need to maintain. If you have tons of these little segments, like you got to keep an eye on all of them, you need to manage all of them, you need to test creative for all of them. It becomes a lot of work. So you want to have your audiences be big enough that you're not losing media efficiency, but at the same time segmented enough that the right customer can get the right message. So that's a very good non-answer of a rule of thumb on how to do that, because it really depends. If you're a site that gets a million uniques, a month, your retargeting audience is going to be huge. You can segment that really small because each segment is going to be relatively large. But if you're a newer brand or an earlier stage company that doesn't have a lot of traffic, you might not even be able to segment beyond, maybe 2 groups.
Yeah. And I mean, I would imagine that even if you're not doing any kind of segmentation, it's probably still better than, or the
Absolutely.
you would expect would be better than not retargeting, just since that's pretty high intent traffic to begin with, unless you're um, like, I know, for example, lead posts, we do a lot of blog posts, and some of them are higher in the funnel and very kind of SEO based
Mm-hmm.
ideas where maybe we would want to filter that traffic out entirely. But other than that, that for the most part, people who are looking at your main marketing site are going to be.
Yeah, and just like you're describing with lead post of filtering out really like high funnel, low intent like SEO traffic. For a direct to consumer brand, you definitely want to filter out your previous purchasers for at least a certain amount of time, depending on what your product is. If you're a mattress, that person probably isn't buying another mattress for a decade. So, one, you don't want to annoy them with your ads and have them keep coming. And two, you don't want to spend money on them because you've already converted them. But if maybe you're a consumable product, so like, a food, a razor blade, like something people are going to reuse over and over, you can do some research on your internal data and say, like, what is the average time between purchases? And so maybe you'll exclude that customer for 30 days and say, like, okay, after 30 days, they've probably used it up or they're close to finishing it. Now's the time to bring them back for that resell or upsell to another version or another product.
And when you're trying these things, what are the main metrics that you're looking at? Uh, Probably somewhat similar to the metrics you look for in any e-commerce campaign. But what do you look for to say, okay, this is working, or maybe we need to rework this?
Yeah. So cost per acquisition is always important. Return on ad spend is important. Whatever your most important KPIs are, those don't really change. I do care about click through rate, um, maybe a little bit more in retargeting, just because if people aren't clicking through on your retargeting ads, you're probably not bringing them relevant new information. You're just showing them information that they already know or have seen about your brand or product. So click through rate's really critical. Frequency gets important just because if click through rate gets really low but frequency is really high, it means you're probably overspending on your retargeting ads, and it becomes less efficient to you. Because the other thing that you really need to balance out is you spent some amount of money initially to get the person to your site, whether that's through paid advertising or through time and resources spent on SEO and word of mouth and brand building. So you can't have a really, really high cost per acquisition or a really low return on ad spend on your retargeting campaigns, because it's not going to blend out to be an overall efficiently acquired customer.
Right. So you've already invested money in these people. Or you wouldn't be able to retarget them in the first place. So yeah, that's a great point. And would you say, as you mentioned frequency, how do you find the balance between staying top of mind and annoying people? Well, let's go with that as the
Yeah, you're asking a lot of the really tough questions around like benchmarking metrics. And the reason I don't like to give solid answers on those is because it's really brand dependent. If you're a brand that has a really long path to purchase, it's very high consideration. So maybe a luxury item or something expensive, or even something that's not expensive, but if it's, a product for the home or like the kitchen that requires buy-in from multiple people in the household before you purchase, it's going to take longer for that consumer to make a decision than an inexpensive impulse buy. So, how do you balance the frequency? I think if it's an impulse buy where it's like, hey, this is an easy decision. I'm just going to buy it. It's for myself. I don't need to talk to anyone else. I think the frequency in a shorter period of time can get a little higher, because it's like, hey, just push them over the edge, get them to buy. But if it's something that's going to take 30, 60, 90 days, a year, whatever that time to purchase is, you don't want the frequency to get too crazy, because that's when it becomes annoying of it's always there. I'm seeing it forever. I don't want to see this anymore. Um, you want to stay relevant, but not annoying over those longer periods of time, if that
right.
helps answer the question.
Yeah, I think that's a great way to think about it, because all this stuff people have to test it for themselves, because it's always going to be different. Every brand, every audience, it's just all these little differences, and you never know exactly how they're going to affect things. What do you and this is another one of those types of questions. What do you think about a lot of people, when they think about retargeting, they're worried about creeping people out, making them and then or just annoying them. And I know recent research, it seems like Gen Z is pretty cool with that, and then as you get to older customers, they're less cool. But what are some things you can do to not creep people out, or is there an ideal timing to come out there with some retargeting? They come on the site, look at some shoes, and then immediately you're like, hey, you forgot these shoes for what?
Yeah. Good question. So I think what you described is younger generations are less creeped out by it because they understand how it works. When retargeting first came out, I think it was very weird and uncomfortable, and it, felt like, oh, the site's listening to me, they're following me around now. Uh, I think that's starting to phase out because people realize that that's just kind of how the internet works. And if I go on a site and I view something, I might see it in an ad again in the future. So I think that just one, it's phasing out. Two, it's going to be phased out in a couple of years entirely. When I say phased out, I mean that fear of, is this creepy or how are they doing it? Just people have learned and acclimated to it. And then the second part of the question is around how how do you message in the ad and in the creative so it's not uncomfortable for the user? I think it depends on the again, it's an answer that is, it depends, because it depends on the product. If it's a, highly personalized product of, maybe something related to a health condition, you have to be very cautious. We've worked with a number of different telehealth companies over the years, and you need to be very careful because if somebody viewed a product page around a certain medical condition that they have, they might become very uncomfortable seeing that medical condition in their Facebook feed because that feed might not be private. They might be scrolling through it with a family member, and then they're like, hey, like, why are you seeing ads for this? Or why are you seeing it? It's like the old marketing case study of Target sending mail to a house because they knew that the family member was pregnant. But like the dad in the house didn't know that she was pregnant yet and sent a really angry letter to Target. And then it turned out like the daughter was pregnant or something like that. I think everybody's heard that marketing case study. So it's really product dependent. And you just need to be kind of cautious and empathetic to what you're selling of, hey, where is this person going to see this ad? And another category that's most relevant where I've worked is we've worked in a lot of female clothing. Mm-hmm. So, different lingerie companies and stuff like that. There's certain things that people maybe are scrolling Facebook or Instagram at work during the day that they don't want to see, where we would actually segment those campaigns to be, maybe only after work or evening hours to make sure that you're not, scrolling through your feed. Everybody does it while they're at work or, out somewhere and seeing something that they're going to scroll right past because they're not going to click it during the day. But, at certain times of the day, they're probably much more likely and more comfortable to engage with that ad.
Yeah, those are all really great points, and even some things that I hadn't even thought of. So that's awesome. Do you have any examples or real life case studies you can share with us, just of retargeting examples that you've seen work really well, that people could learn from?
Yeah. I think it does the best in higher consideration purchases. So things that take a little longer to make that decision because often those products have a lot of competitors and you need to stay top of mind. So specifically, we've worked with, I don't know, maybe a dozen different mattress brands over the years. Mattresses are high consideration because typically it's expensive. Typically, you don't get to try it before you buy one online. You need to convince, if there's two people sleeping on the mattress, you need to convince them to get buy-in. So I think retargeting in the mattress industry has been really good. I use them as an example a lot when I talk about different things related to D2C, just because it's unique with the level of consideration and the cost. It's not an impulse buy. I think different brands have done it different ways. So Casper, for example, has always been very brand heavy, very focused on the aesthetic of their ads and being very beautiful and being very subtle in their language, which appeals to a certain customer. Where maybe on the other side, Lisa, which is another mattress company, is a lot more bold in their advertising. It's you know, very discount focused,
Mhm.
very a lot of urgency in their ads of like, hey, we got to push you over. You got to buy now. It's on sale. It's the sale's going away. You're never going to see it again. Very different than Casper. We worked with a brand called Molecule that had a lot of celebrity endorsement, and it was different celebrities in the retargeting campaigns trying to get people to buy. So there's a lot of different ways to slice this, and not necessarily one is immediately better than another, but it's understanding your brand, understanding your product, understanding what resonates with your customer to try and create a little more differentiation, because a lot of these D2C brands have a lot of competitors, and you know, short of the marketing, they're relatively very similar products.
Yeah, and that's a great lesson for anybody. And it always surprises me how often people don't do this. And it's just you need to know your customers, know your target audience, and that goes for any kind of marketing, really. And um, can be harder to figure that out
Whether
sometimes.
it's just retargeting or digital marketing in general, like all the principles of regular marketing apply. It's just not a computer or a phone or whatever that is. Know your customer, know what they respond to, serve it to them in a way that makes them comfortable and more likely to engage with your brand or your product that you're going to buy, that you want them to buy, or the action that you want them to take. It's, none of this is really rocket science. I think, especially in digital and retargeting, where you have all this, what looks like technical complexity,
Mhm.
just keep it really simple. Know who your customer is, know what they like, get your ad in front of them in the right place. And they're going to eventually convert if you have a good product and a good offer. So it's not that difficult, I don't think, but people like to make it much more complicated than it is often.
Well, you're the expert. It's easy for you to say.
Fair. It's fair.
Well, thank you for coming on the show. This has really been very insightful. Where can people follow you, or uh, you out there sharing these insights anywhere else that they can
Yeah,
see?
probably the best place would be on LinkedIn. If you just look up Steve Dinelli, you'll find me. I don't really post on Twitter that often. I probably should be. I'm not on many of the other social networks, but if you reach out to me on LinkedIn, you want to ask questions or anything, I'm always happy to help. I advise a number of different companies. I do a lot of early stage angel investing now. So if you have questions around digital marketing, around early stage companies, D2C, just find me on LinkedIn, shoot me a message, and I'll get back to you there for sure.
Awesome. Thank you, Steve.
Thanks, Roy. Really appreciate being on and really enjoyed the conversation.